Chapter 521. Moments prior to the fight. Casually coming out of his room, Edward made his way toward the arena. Along the way he couldn't help but think about Ren. I'm curious about his strength. In spite of the fact that it had been 4 years since he last met him, he remembered him as a promising talent. In comparison to Kevin Voss, he was not exactly a high-profile talent, but an incident caused his name to spread far and wide at the time. Something about him defeating a demon or something. Looks like I've just arrived in time. A loud cheer greeted Edward as he stepped into the arena. After arriving at his designated platform and entering the room that overlooked the entire arena, he sat down on a sofa and made himself comfortable. On the left side we have a familiar opponent. This is someone who has never lost a fight and whose Duke ranking is 3rd. The demoness's loud voice echoed out of the arena as he sat down. Following her announcement, the gates opened and a figure slowly came out. With semi-long black hair and deep yellow pupils that glowed with a strange light, Lightning Dragon slowly approached the arena's center. His very presence caused the arena to quiet down for a couple of seconds. Once his feet came to a stop, the demoness extended her hand toward the other side of the arena and announced, "Our right corner contains a figure that we've been waiting for eagerly. A newcomer who has already reached such heights in such a short period of time. He's finally coming out." Shifting his body forward, Edward sat upright. His desire was to see how much this once youth had grown since he had last seen him. When the gates of the arena slowly rose, a figure with deep blue eyes and white hair slowly emerged. Just like Lightning Dragon, his entire presence caused the arena to quiet down. While his eyes remained fixed on the figure opposite him, Lightning Dragon, his calm and rhythmical footsteps echoed out loud. While slowly approaching the center of the arena, he displayed indifference toward the cheers from the crowd or anyone else. At this moment, all of his attention was focused on his opponent. "I like that." There was a slight curl on Edward's lips as he noted this. The way he carried himself. It was impressive. Neither arrogant nor overbearing but calm and focused. The perfect combination that made one stand apart from the masses. I wonder if Amanda is just as strong as him. Thinking about his daughter, Edward's face flashed with sadness. The thought of leaving her alone with all of his responsibilities pained his heart beyond measure. If not for this shitty place, he would have long sought a way to return home, but this proved much more difficult than he had expected. The demon world was just that scary. Just wait a little longer. Edward secretly clenched his fists. "You may begin." The demoness' loud voice signaled the start of the match, jolting Edward out of his thoughts. For more novel, visit lworld.com. His eyes grew sharper as he shifted his attention back to the arena. "Show me what you've got." The first to make his move was Ren. Placing his hand over the sheath of his blade, he quickly got into a stance as mana erupted from out of his body. Click. What happened next was so fast that no one was able to react on time. Not even Edward, as he had difficulty keeping track of what happened. He only remembered hearing a faint clicking sound before a bright white light flashed and a metallic ring echoed. Everything happened within the time it took for him to blink his eyes, and once his focus returned to the match, he found Ren's sword drawn from his sheath, aimed at Lightning Emperor's heart. However, what was most shocking was the fact that Lightning Emperor had casually blocked the attack by tilting the body of the sword in his hand. Edward's pupils dilated as his demeanor shifted. He was able to react to that? He quickly sat up straight and paid close attention to the match. While he had originally come here to get a peek at Ren, after having seen the first exchange, he discarded such thoughts and paid proper attention to the match. He could no longer afford such leisure. From Ren's lightning-fast attack that he could not properly see, to Lightning Dragon's ability to block such attacks. He had severely underestimated both of them. What an interesting pair. Duke Anazekas flashed with interest as he gazed at the arena below. Specifically toward the two individuals who had just had their first exchange. "This is the first time I've seen White Reaper use his sword. Who would have known that he had hidden something like this?" The speed of his attack. It was fast. Really fast. So much so that even Duke Anazek had a hard time fully seeing its course. That said, that was simply because he wasn't paying attention. Had he been paying attention, he would have been able to follow along. But what's more impressive is Lightning Dragon. To be able to stop such attack. The edges of Duke Anazeka's lips curled into a sinister grin. How amusing. Your Excellency. It was then that his servant appeared out of nowhere. Without turning around, Duke Anazek asked. What is it? I've got a report for you. Say it. The Blood Prince is currently in one of the platforms looking at the match. Oh. Duke Anazek's attention shifted toward his servant. The smile on his face grew wider. The Blood Prince has come to spectate this match? That's correct. For more information, visit alworld.com. Ha. Raising his hand to caress his mouth, Duke Anazek pondered for a moment. What a rare occasion. Although this wasn't the first time that the Blood Prince had spectated a match, it had been quite a while since he had done so. Does he know something that I don't? Turning around, Duke Anazek gazed in the direction of where the two contestants were. Narrowing his eyes, he muttered out loud. Is he here for Lightning Dragon or White Reaper? How is this possible? Still shaken by the fact that my attack had been blocked, I was unable to react to Lightning Dragon's counterattack. My muscles convulsed severely as lightning crackled in the air and penetrated deeply into my body. Ugh! Clenching my teeth and suppressing the pain, I forcefully stomped my foot on the ground and distanced myself from him. I was fortunate to realize that Lightning Dragon had no interest in pursuing me. Bang! In spite of my efforts to distance myself from Lightning Dragon, I cursed inwardly as my chest heaved up and down unevenly. Damn it! A look of incredulity crossed my face as I looked at Lightning Dragon. How in the world did he do it? How is it possible for him to stop my attack? Or was it a fluke? I was still shaken by what had happened. Sure, this wasn't exactly the first time that my attack had ever been stopped, but to do it so cleanly and calmly? It had never happened to me before. Phew. I was quick to calm down. Knowing that I was in the middle of a battle, I didn't let my emotions get the best of me. Rather, I became calmer. Let's test this one more time. See if it's a fluke or not. Channeling my mana, I decided to take it up a notch. Locking my eyes on Lightning Dragon, who calmly stood in the middle of the arena without a care in the world, I calmly took a step forward and pressed my thumb against the hilt of my sword. The third movement of the Keiki style. Void Step. Click. A subtle clicking sound rang out and my vision warped. At the same time my vision warped, I activated Eyes of Kronos. Let me get a better look and see how you managed to defend my attack. Within what felt like a couple of seconds, Lightning Dragon's figure appeared in front of me. With my sword extended in his direction, I watched it as it neared his head, ready to impale it at any second. But it was then that something shocking happened. It was shocking enough to make my blood turn cold. The most up-to-date NOV are published under alworld.com. With his eyes still focused in the distance, Lightning Dragon shifted the top part of the blade in the direction of where my sword was about to land. What was especially shocking about this situation was the speed at which he was doing it. From my view, it looked as though time was flowing at a natural rate for him. What? Click. A dull metallic sound reverberated throughout the arena as my eyes opened wide in shock. How? Staring at the tip of my sword, which was perfectly blocked by the body of his sword, I found myself unable to comprehend the situation. How was it possible? Your sword art. Jolting me out of my stupor was Lightning Dragon's voice. Before I could even reply, thin bolts of lightning crackled around him. Crackle, crackle. It wasn't long before the bolts of lightning converged on the end of my sword in sync, sending electricity coursing through my body. I was instantly hit by a wave of dizziness as the muscles in my arms spasmed. Ugh. Clenching my teeth, I tried to suppress the pain. But it was then that Lightning Dragon made his move. Extending his left hand, he opened up his palm and reached out for my head. It was a simple movement. Neither slow nor hurried. However, this seemingly simple move caused the back of my hair to stand as my eyes opened widely. I need to avoid this. That was all I thought as the hand reached closer to me. A sense of impending doom gripped me tightly, forcing me to release all my mana. It was clear to me that I would lose the match if I let that hand touch me. Whing. Forcing all my mana out of my body, I clenched my teeth and directed all my mana toward my sword. Cage. Gritting my teeth, my muscles bulged and the mass of the sword sharply rose. Before long, I found myself incapable of holding the sword and it quickly fell to the ground as its mass grew. At the same time this happened, Lightning Dragon's hand came to a pause. It wasn't too far away from my face, maybe a quarter of a meter, but after sensing what I was doing, he stopped whatever he was doing and glanced toward my sword. My sword soon hit the ground and a thunderous noise echoed out. Bang! In the wake of the impact, a crater was formed on the ground and granules of sand flew everywhere. Quick to react, Lightning Dragon pressed his foot against the ground and distanced himself from me. The situation was not as fortunate for me as I lost my balance and fell forward. But that was enough. I had accomplished my goal and that was to avoid his attack. Eche. Pressing my left hand against the ground, I disrupted the flow of mana to my sword, and it quickly returned to its original mass. He's strong, isn't he? It was then that a voice echoed from behind. Without needing to look, I knew who it belonged to. Not only can he see your moves, but he can also keep up with them. His voice seemed particularly serious as he spoke. However, what shocked me the most were his next words. And he's someone whose talent isn't any weaker than Kevin's. Chapter 522. His talent isn't any weaker than Kevin's? The words he spoke resonated loudly within my head as I looked in the opposite direction, where Lightning Dragon was currently standing. How is this possible? I wondered as I slowly got up. My breath had evened out, but his words still left me stunned. How come I don't know anything about him? Was there something that caused someone so significant to disappear from my memory? Or was he simply left out? As I glanced at my other self briefly, I decided not to speak. There was a time for everything, and right now I was in the middle of a match. There was no point in wasting time on something I was most likely not going to get an answer to. Whew. I took a deep breath. Opening his mouth, my other self asked, "Do you have a plan?" I didn't answer. Regardless, he continued to speak. "Lend me your body and I will beat him for you." No. I shook my head before I started to channel all my mana toward my sword. I can do it myself. Putting aside the fact that I didn't trust him, I wasn't going to rely on him for everything. How would I ever learn if that happened? And the fact that I had an idea of how his eyes worked. Watch me. As I extended my sword in the air, I drew a circle. Following this, a translucent yellow disc appeared before me. Clenching my hand, the yellow disc slowly turned blue. Ring of Vindication, Elemental Discharge, Lightning Scions. My eyes locked on Lightning Dragon, who took a defensive stance as I gripped my sword and pressed my thumb against its hilt. Go. Pointing in his direction, the disc shot in his direction. In the meantime, I closed my eyes and pushed the sword's hilt upward. Click. The third movement of the Keiki style. Void Step. Once again my vision warped and I appeared in front of Lightning Dragon. My vision slowed down as I activated Eyes of Kronos, and a familiar scene appeared before me. My eyes immediately looked toward his hand. I was curious as to how he was able to move so fast. There must be something. It was then that I noticed something. While staring at his hand, which seemed to be moving at the same rate as my sword, I noticed something peculiar. And it was the fact that I could see small blue threads spewing out of his hand as he tilted his sword to block my attack. Is this the reason for his speed? Though I wasn't sure, I made a mental note to myself. Here goes nothing. My sword suddenly slipped from my grasp just as I was about a few meters from him. Reducing the effect of Eyes of Kronos, I pressed my foot against the ground and twisted my waist. Cracks formed on the area where I pressed my foot. Ugh. In spite of my body's efforts, I kept pushing forward as the momentum of the attack carried me forward. Regardless, this was what I wanted as I clenched my hand into a fist. Twisting my body at a 180-degree angle, I aimed the back of my fist toward the side of Lightning Dragon's face. In the meantime, my sword, which I had let go, was still shooting in his direction. With just a fraction of a second to spare, I was on my way to hitting Lightning Dragon in the head, while my sword was headed for his heart, which had been blocked by his tilted sword. But it was then that something happened. Right as my fist was about half a meter away from his face, Lightning Dragon's eyes suddenly shone a brilliant hue of yellow as his other hand quickly raised. Thin blue threads spewed out of his hand as his hand traveled at a speed that was faster than my fist. I knew it. A smile crept up on my face once I saw this. Just as his arm started to move, the translucent blue ring that I threw before shifted slightly. Shining a bright hue of blue for a quarter of a second, the blue threads coming out of Lightning Dragon's hand scattered, and his arm, which was moving at an inhuman speed, halted for a split second. It may not have sounded like much, but it was enough for me. Clank. After the back of my fist struck a soft surface, Lightning Dragon's body crashed into one of the walls as time reverted to its usual flow. Bang. Ha, ha. I gasped heavily as I rested my arms against my knees. That move just now took about 1/10 of all my mana. Additionally, since I used my head chip to supplement my attack, my mind was also fairly exhausted. Still, I had achieved my purpose. It worked. It wasn't easy, but I had figured out the secret behind Dragon Emperor's all-seeing eyes. To call it all-seeing wasn't exactly correct. Rather, the only thing they could do was detect the mana flow in the air. It was thanks to this that he was able to predict the movement of my sword. It only dawned on me after the first void step, as I noticed that his eyes didn't move during that attack. But it wasn't just his eyes that were scary. No, rather, it was his inhumanly fast movements that him especially terrifying. This added with his eyes made him a perfect counter for me. That said, that isn't quite enough to stop me. Raising my head to stare in the opposite direction, I watched as a large cloud of dust shrouded the area in which Lightning Dragon had crashed. The cheers from the crowd were at an all-time high as they all talked over each other. Even then, I did not let this small victory get the best of me. I wasn't naive enough to believe I had dealt enough damage to defeat Lightning Dragon. And I was soon proved correct as bolts of lightning materialized out of thin air, crashing against the ground. The arena instantly turned quiet. Swoosh. A gentle breeze blew away the dust in the air, and a familiar figure could be seen standing in the distance. With lightning covering the area around him, Lightning Dragon gazed in my direction. Massaging his cheek, he slowly opened his mouth. You. His hair started to flutter wildly as the lightning around him crackled even more fiercely. What's your name? He asked after a while. Opening my mouth, it soon turned into a small grin. White Reaper. I answered as I lowered my head. Let's go with White Reaper for now. White Reaper. As he repeated the name under his breath, he nodded and stared at me again. I will remember it. He then took a step forward. Half a second later, he appeared in front of me. Unable to react in time, I felt a hand press against my stomach as a terrifying force dug deeply into my body, sending it crashing all the way toward the other end of the arena. Bang! My heart pounded as a powerful force crashed down on my back, knocking the wind out of me. Walk. A groan inevitably escaped from my mouth as I fell to the ground with both knees and arms on the floor. But that was not all. After resurfacing in front of me, I was once again hit by a powerful force that sent my body flying all the way toward the other side of the arena. Bang. Shit. Once again falling to the ground, I grimaced in pain. But yet again, I was unable to gather myself as a shadow appeared next to me. It was at that moment that I instantly activated the one, and snapped my head in his direction. Stop. Locking eyes with me, his foot came to a stop. Quickly extending my hand, I grasped his ankle and squeezed tightly. Crack-a. A bone-shattering sound echoed out. In spite of this, I was surprised to see that Lightning Dragon's face did not change when his ankle fractured. Rather, it remained impassive as he kept his gaze in my direction. Jumping up with his other foot, he twisted his body in the air, twisting his broken ankle even more, and his other foot came crashing down against the back of my head. Everything happened so fast that I was unable to react on time. Bang! My vision darkened and for a split second I lost consciousness. It was only brief, but at that moment I lost consciousness. I let go of Lightning Dragon's ankle and he finally distanced himself from me. Kish! Pressing my right hand against the ground to lift my body up, my eyes fixed themselves on the blood that dripped down from my forehead. Fuck. I cursed. He's really strong. Like really, really strong. Raising my head, I focused my attention on Lightning Dragon, who quickly chugged down a potion. In a short time, his fractured and twisted ankle had started recovering in a visible manner. Tapping my bracelet, I also chugged down a potion and my injuries started to heal. Odd. Standing back up, my forehead creased. It was then that a figure appeared next to me. With his arms crossed, he closely examined Lightning Dragon. He then opened his mouth. You felt it right? He purposely let you heal yourself. Glancing in his direction, I nodded my head. I did. Squinting his eyes as he stared into the distance, he softly muttered. You better prepared yourself. What? In the blink of an eye, his figure disappeared before I could ask him what he meant. I should have known. I secretly shook my head. My fault for expecting anything from him. Breathing out, I calmed down and closed my eyes. Opening my eyes again, my gaze was met with lightning dragons. Sparks appeared all over his body as a powerful hue escaped from his body. In his right hand was his sword. In response, I stepped forward quickly, my eyes narrowing tightly. It had to be noted that in the entire match, Lightning Dragon had never used his sword. For him to use it now could only mean one thing. He was starting to get serious. You. Staring in my direction, Lightning Dragon opened his mouth. Staring back at him without replying, I pressed my hand against the side of my sword. In spite of my actions, he didn't seem to grow wary as he continued talking. Your sword art. Pausing, I finally opened my mouth and asked. What about my sword art? This was the second time he mentioned my sword art. Did he know something about my sword art? Impossible. Immediately shaking my head, I put an end to such thoughts. It was impossible. Instead of answering, placing his sword by the side of his waist, he closed his eyes and my vision instantly darkened. Everything around me disappeared as Lightning Dragon's figure was the only thing that remained. Whether it was the crowd or the noise coming from them, everything was gone. Slowly he took a stance and my heart stopped beating. Time seemed to have slowed down and my body shook. He had stance. My pupils quickly dilated and before I could say anything else, I heard a familiar clicking sound ring in the air. Click. Chapter 523. My eyes opened widely as a subtle yet familiar clicking sound filled the air. Impossible. The thought flooded through my mind as I subconsciously activated my Eyes of Chronos to slow down time. My shock grew even more as I watched Lightning Dragon slowly unsheath his sword and aim it at me. Despite time moving at a far slower rate than reality, Lightning Dragon's movement seemed smooth and completely unaffected by the rate at which time was flowing. Thin blue threads spewed out from his hands and sword, as the sword fully unsheathed itself from the scabbard. What was worse was the fact that all I could do at the moment was watch as the sword slowly aimed for my heart. But ever so slightly, I was able to move and shift my body in a way that avoided my heart. Just barely. Spurt. A small hole appeared on the left side of my chest as time flowed at a natural rate. Following this, my body was pierced by an inexplicable sharp pain. Cage. Despite my best efforts to distance myself from him, as he again grasped his sword's sheath, Lightning Dragon continued to pursue me. With blood dripping down from my shoulder, I pressed my foot to the ground and cracks formed beneath the area I stepped on. Fuck. I cursed underneath my breath as I once reactivated Eyes of Chronos and carefully analyzed his every movement. This time I activated Eyes of Chronos to its fullest potential as time slowed down even more. As the seconds passed, it became increasingly difficult to see as the skill took a particular toll on my eyes. Regardless, I persevered through the pain. Suppressing the pain, I paid close attention to his every movement. This stance and movement, it is without a doubt the Keiki style. Using that information, I was able to confirm that it was indeed the Keiki style. It was clear from his movements and how he channeled his mana. It was exactly how I did it. But how is this possible? Upon realizing this fact, many questions emerged inside my mind. Of such question, the main one was, did Grandmaster Keiki give this sword art to anyone else other than me? If I thought about it, this made sense. It wouldn't be surprising if Grandmaster Keiki had set up a similar place to the one I visited, considering that his main objective was to defeat the demons. The more people that used his sword art, the higher the chances of us winning. That being said, he wasn't stupid to the point of giving it to anyone. If everyone had the Keiki style, chaos would inevitably ensue in the human domain. In other words, doing so would be the same as giving nukes to just anyone. There was a reason why most 5-star sword manuals were kept hidden. It wasn't only for the sake of keeping it to themselves, but it was mostly to limit people from gaining access to them. That and the fact that not just anyone could practice them. This must be it. After racking my brain over the matter, this was the only explanation I could think of for why Lightning Dragon knew the Keiki style. You're wrong. But it was at that moment that a figure appeared next to me. With his eyes locked on Lightning Dragon in the distance, he softly muttered. Have a better look at him. What? Was my analysis wrong? Gazing back in the direction of where Lightning Dragon, I did as he told me and paid closer attention to his attack. It's the same. Nevertheless, I found nothing unusual about his attack. It was exactly the same as the regular keiki style. Wait. But just then, my eyes opened widely as I finally took note of something. His eyes. They were shining. And when I laid my eyes upon them, I suddenly felt naked. It felt as though all of my secrets were laid bare for him to see. What the? Shifting my body once more, I deactivated Eyes of Kronos. Spurt. I felt a sharp pain coming from the right side of my shoulder. Ugh. As I suppressed my groan, I returned my attention to Lightning Dragon's eyes. They are not shining. When I thought back about what his eyes were capable of, it finally hit me. That's right, his eyes. As I raised my foot, I whipped it at Lightning Dragon's head in a swift whipping motion. This time I didn't apply any mana to my leg as it was just a simple kick. Then while I was doing that, I activated Eyes of Kronos and closely observed his eyes. I wanted to see whether they shined or not. Swoosh. With thin lightning bolts spewing out of his face, Lightning Dragon moved his head back and easily dodged my attack. He then followed up with his own palm strike that directly hit me in the chest, sending me crashing against the side of the arena. Bang. Suddenly feeling a powerful force hit my back, I spat out saliva and my eyes rolled backward. Slowly my body slid down the arena's side. Cough, cough. Coughing a couple of times, I raised my head to stare in the opposite direction. It was then that my eyes locked with Lightning Dragon, who didn't seem interested in pursuing me. His eyes didn't shine. At that moment that I kicked his head, his eyes didn't shine. This confirmed it. My theory as to why he was able to use the keiki style. It's all thanks to those eyes. The latest investigations are on underworld.com website. His eyes were unique. They allowed him to see the mana flow of an opponent. My initial lack of consideration made me grossly underestimate their power. Lightning Dragon's eyes were not the only thing I had grossly underestimated. I had also underestimated him completely. I would have never expected him to be able to mimic the keiki style from just a couple of glances at my sword art. By mimicking its mana flow, coupled with his incredible speeds, he was able to create a version of the keiki style that wasn't any different from the original one. No wonder I wasn't able to tell them apart. With the mana flow being the same, and the speed of his movements also being the same, it was practically impossible for me to tell them apart. If he could do that with my sword style, could he also do it with other sword styles? Chills down my spine as I thought of such a possibility. Just what kind of monster is this guy? Being able to analyze my sword art in such a short period of time, I now understood why he compared his talent to Kevin's. He was simply a monster. Lightning Dragon's previously vibrant eyes returned to their usual languid state when I gazed at them. Tilting his head a little, he lazily asked, "Is this really all you got? Or do you still have something up your sleeves? I'm starting to become bored." Without answering him, I wiped the side of my mouth. "So?" His impatient voice rang throughout the arena. Gazing in his direction, the edges of my lips curled upwards a bit. "Give me a second. I've figured it out. The way to beat him." Taking out a potion, I quickly chugged it. Lightning Dragon's brows furrowed when he saw this. Regardless, he didn't seem to have any intentions of stopping me as he just continued watching me from the same spot. As my wounds slowly started to heal up, I started to stretch my neck and shoulders. After that, I calmly walked toward the middle of the arena. As I walked through the quiet arena, the rhythmical sound of my footsteps echoed out loud. I only stopped when I was a couple of meters away from him. In the ensuing silence, neither of us said a word. As if we were on cue with each other, we both placed our hands on the sheath of our sword. Click, click. Two metallic clicking sounds echoed throughout the arena as two swords suddenly intersected in the air. Like, the sand beneath us rose in the air as our swords intersected, scattering everywhere. Distancing ourselves, we repeated the same thing and our swords intersected once more. Like. As both of our swords continued to intersect in the air at incredible speeds, a powerful metallic ring echoed in the air for a good minute before it was replaced by more clicking sounds. Full understanding on the lworld.com platform. Incredible. Edward absent-mindedly muttered as he gazed at the match. As he enjoyed the fight to the fullest, he had long given up the idea of analyzing the two contestants. Be it Lightning Dragon or Ren, the two of them were simply incredible to watch. Click, click. With each clicking sound, the two figures would disappear before reappearing in front of each other with their swords drawn out. Their movements were so fast that Edward was simply unable to keep track of them. Despite that, he could tell from just how to glance how deadly each of their strikes was. Not only did they contain unimaginable power, but the speed at which they moved was simply terrifying. That was all Edward could mutter at the moment as his face progressively hardened. If I were to fight against them. Staring at the two for the first time in a long time, Edward didn't feel 100% confident about his victory. While he wasn't 100% confident about his victory, that didn't mean he thought he would lose. He just thought that there was a possibility of him losing, which had never happened to him before, as he had always dominated his matches. Focusing his attention back toward the arena, Edward's eyebrows furrowed tightly. It looks like they are about to go all out. Within a second of his words, two massive hues radiated from the bodies of both contestants, covering the entire arena. Silence had reigned since the start of the match, with the crowd's eyes glued to the two people in the middle. It was then that it happened. Extending his sword forward, Ren suddenly drew a small circle in the air. Following this, once the circle formed, he extended his arms in the air, and 10 rings materialized out of nowhere. Clenching his fists, the rings suddenly turned blue. He then raised his hand and pointed it in the direction of Lightning Dragon. In response to this simple motion, the rings quickly shot toward Lightning Dragon. Following that, he proceeded to place his hand on the sheath of his sword. Prick, prick. Suddenly, a series of fissures started manifesting around Lightning Dragon as Edward stood up in shock. What the? On the other side, Lightning Dragon's eyes shone even brighter as his hand touched the sheath of his sword. Pressing his foot forward, he took a stance and a surge of mana erupted out of his body. Crack. Crack. Though at a much slower rate than Ren's, fissures also started to form around Ren as tremendous energy started to spew out of the two figures. At this point, no matter if it was Edward or the crowd, it was well known that the match had reached its climax and that the winner would be revealed after the final exchange between the two. Staring at the two individuals in the middle of the arena, everyone held their breath in anticipation. Who is going to win? Chapter 524. I'm bored. Over the course of Lightning Dragon's short life, the same words had been repeated so many times that he had also gotten bored of saying them. But he couldn't help it. He had truly gotten bored. Prodigy. Next Union Head. Humanity's Hope. Originally known as Liam Nepheli, Lightning Dragon was once hailed as one of mankind's brightest prodigies. In the past he had attended the Lock, and that was where he gained his fame. In spite of this, he had no pleasant memories of the place. As a transfer student, he had great expectations when he first arrived at the Lock. Why wouldn't he? It was supposed to be the #1 academy in the human domain. It was a world filled to the brim with huge prodigies who would one day become the backbone of mankind. His first year at the Lock was probably the best year he had ever had. His constant drive to improve himself, along with his friendship, kept life from becoming monotonous. As a matter of fact, he had also acquired a rival while at the Lock. An individual who pushed him forward and followed him from behind. His name was... what was it again? Givan? Gary? Gilbert? It was such a long time ago that he had already forgotten. But those were truly fun days for Liam. It was probably the last time he had ever truly been happy. Unfortunately, those days never really lasted long. After his talent began to outshine everyone else's, his so-called friends began to look at him differently. It was no longer out of friendship but out of greed. If he becomes the next of the Union, he will support me in the future. I should stay closer to him. He will make a good connection. They didn't need to say anything for him to understand what they were thinking. Their faces said it all. Life became duller from that point on. Despite this, he continued to train hard, and his strength continued to rise at an alarming rate. It had gotten to the point where almost all the big guilds in the human domain were salivating over him. He would constantly get secret offers from the top guilds or even the Union itself. He naturally rejected them. He wasn't interested in such things. Responsibilities weren't his thing. They were boring. That said, in spite of losing a lot of his friends, Liam kept staying at the Lock because of his rival, or should he say best friend? Yeah, that sounded about right. Best friend. As far as he was concerned, he was the only one who hadn't given up on him. It was kind of fun. But that too inevitably came to an end as his rival soon stopped comparing himself to him and pushing himself like he once did. He tried to remedy the situation by holding back a lot, but in the end his friend and rival found out about his intentions and stopped talking to him altogether. Whenever they met thereafter, he would greet him with a short nod and disappear into the distance. It was from that point on that Liam's world became dyed in gray. His life had become monotonous as nothing excited him anymore. Updated under world.zoom. How boring. The boring life continued until he found himself on a school excursion trip along with his classmates during his third year of Locke. It was supposed to be a typical school trip, but reality proved to be quite different as they were suddenly attacked by demons. As it turned out, it wasn't just a random attack. The attack seemed to target all Locke students. Or at least on the surface, as the true target was him, as several marquee-ranked demons were dispatched during the operation. In order to ensure the success of their plans and stop any reinforcements from coming, the demons attacked several places simultaneously, including the Union. As a precaution, the Locke had also put in place guards in case something like this happened. However, they too were stopped as the several marquee-ranked demons, including the Monolith members, had arrived to stop them. Everyone, including his rival, ran away the moment they spotted the demon. The only one that didn't run away that day was Liam. At that moment he didn't stay behind because he wanted to save his classmates nor because he wanted to be a hero. He was filled with inexplicable excitement for the first time in a long time as his dull gray world finally regained some color. As he stared at a powerful enemy, he felt an impending sense of doom. So strong that it could kill him. Yet, it also brought color to his dull gray world as he proceeded to attack the demon. As he attacked the demon, his eyes shone and a smile spread across his face. Finally, someone who he could go all out against. People would have called him crazy for suddenly attacking a demon like that if they had been present, but Liam didn't mind. As far as he was concerned, he only wanted to fight against the demon in front of him. Nothing else mattered to him. He wanted nothing more than to alleviate himself from the boredom that had been plaguing him for the past 2 years. But he was inevitably left disappointed that day. Crash. Crashing against one of the trees, the demon raised his head and gazed in his direction. His eyes were clearly clouded with fear. You're stronger than what the reports have said. All that. I was holding back a lot of my strength. Scratching the back of his head as he stared at the demon, Liam lazily put his sword away. How boring. He ended up muttering as he stared at the demon in front of him. I guess I should finish this quickly. It was at that moment. Wait, did you just say that you were bored? Liam's brows furrowed and his feet came to a stop. What about it? He asked. Putting his back against the tree, the demon pondered for a moment before asking. Why are you bored? Why am I bored? Lowering his head, Liam thought for a moment. Thinking back about his past experiences and lack of challenge in his life, he calmly answered. Because I'm too strong. Too strong. At least for my age. And the older ones won't fight me because they don't want to hurt me. They think that I am too precious to harm. The fact that the guilds were all keeping a close eye on him also contributed to his boredom, as they prevented him from getting into any fights that could endanger his life. Had it not been for the demon's carefully thought-out plan, they would have probably already been here, protecting him. He understood their intentions, but their actions only served to increase his boredom. Honestly, he had gotten so bored that he had started questioning whether living was worth it. It was then that. All you want is excitement, right? The demon asked him. Turning his head to look at him, Liam shook his head. I know what you're trying to do. I won't fall for it. I'm not going to sign a demon contract. This _ content is taken from allworld.com. I'm not asking you to sign a contract. But it was then that the demon shook his head as he murmured in a barely audible tone. Still enough for Liam to hear. I'm not crazy enough to sign a contract with you. Then what do you want? He took a step forward and raised his hand, prepared to kill the demon at any second. Lifting his head up to stare at Liam, the demon quickly said, What if I tell you of a place where you can fight at your heart's content with your life on the line? Liam's hand came to a pause. Speak. A grin manifested across the demon's face as he quickly started to inform Liam about the arena located in the demon realm. The more Liam heard, the more relaxed his hand became as an interest soon flashed across his face. And the winner will become the overlord of the arena. Interesting. A thin smile spread across Liam's face as he thought back on the details of the arena. Thinking for a bit, he asked, "How do I go there?" "You must come with me to the demon realm." Liam's brows furrowed when he heard this. "How would I know that you aren't messing with me?" It was at that moment. Spurt. The demon suddenly raised his hand and proceeded to pierce his stomach with his sharp nails. Black blood spilled on the ground, and the demon slowly pulled out a pulsating orb. He then proceeded to toss it in Liam's direction. "Here you go." Catching it, Liam looked at the demon in confusion. "What's this?" "It's my core." The demon answered. "With it you control my life and death. Is this enough proof that I will keep my words?" Staring at the orb for a couple of seconds, Liam nodded his head. "All right." Spurt. Out of nowhere he cut off his arm and blood spilled everywhere. His actions shocked the demon. What are you doing?" Staring at the arm on the ground, Liam put the demon core away and proclaimed, "From this day forth Liam Nefeli is dead. He died during a fight against a demon trying to save his classmates." Turning around, he proceeded to slash the demon's head. His figure disappeared after that. His disappearance would eventually lead to him becoming missing in action, and he would eventually be proclaimed as dead when they became unable to locate any clues about him regardless of the many years that had passed. After that, Liam entered the demon world, and that was how he entered the arena. First he was excited. Meeting new opponents and being able to fight them with his life on the line to his heart's content. It felt as though he was back at the lock. But bored. The excitement was short-lived as he suffered the same fate as in the past. He had once again become too strong. The feeling of losing. He had long forgotten it, and his days in the arena slowly started to become duller and duller. Will I ever not be bored? After spending exactly 4 years in the arena, his world once again became gray as he no longer even cared about winning. Or so he thought. Prick, prick. Staring at the cracks forming around him, Lightning Dragon found his heart beating at a much faster rate than usual. Unknowingly, a smile spread across his face as he gazed at his opponent. White hair, deep blue eyes, and he also seemed to be younger than him. His sword slowly slipped from its scabbard as he muttered under his breath. This is what I wanted." For the first time in a very long time he had finally felt a feeling that he had long forgotten. Excitement. Bah, thump, bah, thump. As he felt the tremendous power revolving around him, the back of his hair suddenly stood and his heart raced. His opponent's attack was ready. This feeling of death. Feeling the power contained within his opponent's attack, Lightning Dragon's grip on the sword tightened. While closely observing his opponent's technique, his eyes began to strain as he concentrated on the flow of mana. Drip, drip. As he poured all of his mana into them, blood started falling from beneath his eyes. But he didn't care, he didn't want to care. Even if he died, he didn't want to miss this feeling. This thrill. Done. It was then that he finally stopped pouring mana into his eyes as he slowly took a stance. It took a bit, but he had finally memorized his opponent's mana flow and was ready to attack. As he stared at his sword, he thought, "What a powerful technique. It's a pity I will forget this later." Upon redirecting his mana the same way as his opponent was, Lightning Dragon slowly pulled away at the sword. Crackle, crackle. A crackle of lightning began to spread around him as he slowly drew away from the sword. It was then that something happened. Crush. An ear-shattering sound rang out as one of the distant rings shattered. Huh. While Lightning Dragon was preparing to fully pull away from his sword, he suddenly lost control over his lightning scions. His arm came to an abrupt stop. It was only for a brief moment, but that moment proved to be fatal. Shit. Gazing in the direction of the approaching rings, Lightning Dragon cursed. But it was too late for him to do anything. Prick, prick, prick. In a flash, the fissures around him opened and bright flashes of light shot toward him. Wherever he looked, he would find a bright light heading in his direction. Crush, crush. When that happened, the discs in the distance shattered one after another, stopping him from using his lightning scions. Unable to use his lightning scions, the only thing he could do was dully stand in the middle of the arena. Staring at the incoming attacks, Lightning Dragon slowly lowered his hands and muttered. This was a good fight. Chapter 525. Why didn't you kill him? An eerie voice echoed across a small room. With my head lowered, I replied. Did I have to kill him? If so, I do apologize for my actions. In the 2 days since my fight with Lightning Dragon, I had essentially recovered from all of my wounds. Some parts of my body were still sore, but that was just about it. Regarding where I was, it was Duke Anazeka's private area. No, you don't have to be sorry. In the aftermath of my fight with Lightning Dragon, it seemed that I had finally caught the Duke's attention, which was something that I desired from the very beginning. He was instrumental in my inevitable escape. Rather, you did me a favor by not killing him. Lifting my head slightly, I raised my brow. My head lowered once more when I saw the look on his face. Is that so? Then I'm flattered. I'm starting to like you more and more, the Duke said. I could tell he was pleased by the sound of his voice. A faint smile spread across my face as I thanked the Duke. Thank you. Keep thinking that. It was only out of courtesy that I thanked the Duke. While it was obvious I had never planned on killing Lightning Dragon, I was okay with him misunderstanding my intent. After all, who would refuse free goodwill? A little while later, Duke Anazek spoke again. I've recently gotten a report that you've allied yourself with the second ranked in the Duke bracket, with the goal of killing the current overlord, is that right? As soon as I heard his words, I pretended to be shocked before quickly burying it. As expected, the arena is heavily monitored. Don't worry, I won't do anything to you. It's not against the rules. The Duke reassured, evidently acknowledging my reaction. My head lowered further. Nothing truly escapes you, Your Excellency. In spite of saying that, I was rather surprised. For my chat with Silvermoon to be discovered so easily by the Duke made one wonder how deep their surveillance system was. I need to tread more carefully. My awareness of this only heightened my guard regarding my future plans. That said, this wasn't something that I had not expected. Rather, this worked in my favor. The Duke's next words proved me correct. Do you want to fight the next overlord? Raising my head, I replied without any hints of hesitation. Yes. In spite of my quick response, the Duke's face remained the same. My hatred for Edward was always obvious, I never tried to hide it. As a result, the Duke probably didn't find it surprising that I wanted to fight him. Are you that eager to fight the Blood Prince? I indeed am, Your Excellency. Seemingly falling into deep thought, the Duke mused for a moment before he opened his mouth again and asked again. You've observed how the current overlord fights, right? Yes, I have. Then what do you think your chances of beating him are? I paused and thought. After a while I answered. About 50%. If he's hiding something, then more. 50%, huh? Turning around, Duke Anazek interlocked his hands behind his back. That's pretty high, don't you think? Instead of answering, I decided to pose the Duke a different question. Then what do you think, Your Excellency? What are the chances of me beating the current overlord? You. As the Duke fell into thought again, he raised 3 fingers in the air. My brows creased when I saw them. 30%? 30%. The Duke repeated in a deadpan tone. I proceeded to clench my teeth. In a way, it was made possible to see from the outside. But I didn't say anything. I just continued staring at the 3 fingers in the air. Lowering his hand, Duke Azanok smiled. You think that I'm wrong? Yes. I nodded without hesitation. I think that you're... Stop. A cold touch at the back of my neck interrupted my speech as the Duke's voice echoed throughout the room, stopping whatever was aimed at the back of my neck. Cold sweat dripped down on my body as I felt the cold touch at the back of my neck. I would have probably died had it not been for the Duke. With the hair at the back of my neck still standing, I slowly turned my head. It was then that I met eyes with another demon. His features were different compared to the Duke, who looked more like a human. In a butler's attire, the demon behind me glared at me with blood-red eyes. Watch how you speak to the Duke, he warned after slowly removing his hand from the back of my neck. After that, he lowered his head to the Duke and apologized. I apologize for the inconvenience, Your Excellency. It's all right. The Duke casually waved his hand before turning his attention back to me. Meanwhile, the demon quickly retreated from the spot where he had previously stood and quickly disappeared. Don't mind him. Walking up to me, Duke Anazeka's eyes lingered on the spot where his servant used to stand. Back to our discussion. I said that your chances of beating the Overlord are 30%. Do you agree or not? No. I still shook my head. The Duke's face changed a little. But before he could say anything else, I continued. I still have a couple of cards up my sleeves. Upon hearing those words, the Duke's face relaxed and a smile returned to his face. You still have a couple of cards up your sleeve? That is correct. How intriguing. There was a brief pause in the conversation. After a while, Duke Anazek asked, how would you like to become the next overlord? Bingo. Showing a surprised look on my face, I kept my head lowered. Are you really sure? Heh. The Duke let out a short chuckle. Walking toward his desk, he took out a small device from one of the drawers of his desk. I'll help you out. He then proceeded to toss the device in my direction. Here. Thank you. Catching the device, I started to examine it. It looks like a small remote controller. With just a simple glance, I was able to tell what it was. It was the device that was supposed to stop the mana flow of the person wearing the suppressor. In an effort to appear clueless, I flipped it around repeatedly and closely examined it. After a good minute of the same thing, lowering the hand that held the device, I looked at the Duke. What's this? The Duke smiled. That. Extending his hand, he proceeded to point at the device in my hand. Is the device that will turn that 30% into a 100%. 100%? Lowering my hand, I stared at the device in my hand with an absent-minded look on my face. Raising my head again, I asked, if I use this, I will be able to win the match? That is correct. The Duke smiled. All you have to do is press that device in the most critical conditions and the rest will be easy. Just make sure to take advantage of the situation. I see. With a simple nod, I put the device away. The Duke's smile grew bigger when he saw this. As he asked, he had a satisfied look on his face. Is there anything you wish from me? Excuse me. I raised my head to stare at the Duke. He continued. It is only right that I reward you for your efforts. So tell me what you want. What I want. Lowering my head, I pretended to fall into deep thought. In reality, I already knew what I wanted. It was something that I had been aiming for from the very beginning after all. I slowly opened my mouth. If I win. Lifting my head, I met the Duke's eyes. I want to have a fight against you. Ugh. Waking his groggy mind up, Liam blinked a couple of times. What met his sight was a familiar sight. It was the sight of his room's ceiling. One that he had seen for the past couple of years. Did I fall asleep? He managed to mutter after a while. Visit lworld.com for a better reading experience. What happened? In an attempt to recall what had happened, his mind went blank for a few minutes. His eyes, which were filled with vitality a moment ago, started to become dull. As he reflected on his blank memories, he made sure to clearly express his disappointment. Are my memories acting up again? It was always like this. Whenever something happened, regardless of how big or small it was, he would always end up forgetting the next day. This was a consequence of the art he practiced. It was the price he paid in exchange for power, but he was slowly starting to regret his decision. Ever since practicing it, his life had only gotten duller. I guess I probably fell asleep. Halting mid-sentence, it was then that his mind was suddenly flooded with memories. His head recoiled back as his eyes opened widely. I can remember. He joyfully screamed out loud. For the first time in a very long time, he could finally remember what had happened the previous day. It was inevitable for him to become excited after realization. After all, this had never happened to him before. But he didn't let the excitement get the best of him. Taking a deep breath to calm himself down, he carefully inspected his body as he opened and closed his eyes. An expression of wry relief appeared on his face after he realized he had not died. So I'm not dead, huh? It appeared as though his opponent had spared him during the last moment of the fight. Sitting up straight, he proceeded to look at his hands as he once again muttered. I can remember. The fight, he could remember it. This was the first time in a long time that Liam ever remembered one of his fights. He could remember everything. From how the fight panned out to the feelings he felt throughout it. Especially his loss. So this is how it feels to lose. During that moment, he clenched his clothes with one hand as he felt a sharp pain rise in his chest. The corner of his lips pulled upwards as he muttered through his clenched teeth. It's a pretty darn awful feeling. This pain in his chest. This sense of dissatisfaction and frustration. He couldn't quite put how he felt into words, but it was fun. A relieved smile spread across his face. The feeling that he believed he had long lost had finally risen up inside of his body for the first time in a long time, and before he knew it he felt a warm sensation by the side of his cheeks. "It's been so long," he mumbled before closing his eyes and clenching his teeth. "But I don't like it." It was only after he felt it again that Liam realized how painful losing was. He didn't like it one bit. He finally started to remember the reason why he pursued strength so much in the past. It was because of this bitter and cruel feeling. And a feeling that only appeared whenever he lost. Fuck. Clenching his teeth, he leaned back on his bed and covered his eyes with his arm. "I really wanted to win.